My name is Jill Means. I'm a TOSA, which stands for Teacher on Special Assignment for Gifted Education and Curriculum Support. I think there's 11 words in that title, a little lengthy. So I'll be presenting tonight, but I also am supported by Dr. Mary Kahn, our Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Services.
Welcome, everybody.
Thank you for being here, and we have our interpreters here tonight as well. If you're here tonight, it might be because you have a learner who either is identified as gifted or you have a learner who exhibits high potential for academic capabilities or is a high achiever. All of those reasons would be a good reason to be here. And let's go ahead and we'll advance to the next slide. I'm going to start off with a little history about gifted education in our district, and then we'll get into differentiation and what that means and what that looks like in our district. I want to have a little bit of a caveat here. Not all of the slides are quite this text intense, but I do like to put as much information on the slides as possible because we post them on our website. This way, parents who can't be here can go onto the website and get as much information as possible. So don't worry about the words, I'll just talk about it. Focus on the circles in the middle and how there's 3 events really that came together. So back in 2012, 2013, we were shifting from state standards to Common Core standards. So that meant we weren't going to be testing state standards anymore. At the same time, there were changes in categorical funding for what we knew as GATE, Gifted and Talented Education. And at the same time, we realized it had been about 7 years since there had been any differentiation work done in GES. So as a result of these 3 events coming together, these three situations happening at once, we determined that the funding would shift from the GATE program, as it was, to support the differentiation that takes place within the regular school day and within the classroom. And that's why we're here tonight, is to talk about what that looks like now. Is there anyone here who maybe participated in a program that was considered a GATE program, either a pull-out program, maybe once a week, or maybe you were bused to another school, maybe you went to a magnet school? These are the kinds of, this is how funding had been directed, and now we're approaching it a little differently. So we'll take a look at this next slide. I really like this cartoon. It speaks volumes to really the basis for our reasoning. There's a lot of research that surrounds why we would want to educate and provide tools to our general education classroom teachers versus into other programs, other support specialists who would be maybe meeting the needs of our learners once a week or twice a week for a short period of time. Your child, our students, are in their classroom all the time, right? And so who is the most influential person? Their teacher. This quote says, research says, a teacher is said to have 2 to 3 times the impact of any other school factor, including services, facilities, and leadership. Effective teaching has the potential to help level the playing field for individual and family characteristics largely outside of a school's control. So this is what we do. We invest in our people. All right. Differentiation. It's a big word. What does it mean? This is one definition. Lillian Tomlinson is an expert in the field of gifted education, and she defines it as the efforts of teachers to respond to variance within a classroom. So I have a 5th grade student. He goes to Elwood, and I'm pretty sure that in his class there are some kids who are performing at the 5th grade level. But I also know that there are several kids who are not there yet. maybe 1, 2, 3, or more years behind, and there are several more who are beyond, 4th, 5th, 6th, and above. So what does a teacher do with this, right? We've got a grade level span that is really unimaginable. How do we meet the needs, the individual needs of every student in the class at the same time? With differentiation. So let's look at what that is. What does that mean? We're ready for our next slide, thank you. What it is, I want to talk about what it is, and then we'll go into more detail about that. But before we do go into the additional detail, I also want to explain what it is not. So what it is, teachers need to understand readiness. They're going to allow for choice. They facilitate high-level thinking. Quality planning is a big part of this. And they have high expectations for all. So high expectations for all, we're going to talk in a few minutes about differentiation strategies. They were originally designed to meet the needs of our highest level thinkers, but in the meantime we realized that it actually is a quite effective program for all learners. Getting back to quality planning. Sometimes 2, 3, or more times a week, grade level teams, so otherwise known as professional learning teams, will come together to look at data, to look at information, to talk about their students together as a team, the whole grade level. And they'll ask themselves, what do we want our students to learn? Once we've taught and they've learned, how will we know what they've learned and how much more support they might need, or what else they need to do? The third question is, what happens when we teach and they don't get it the first time? What do we do then? And finally, question number 4, which is really the focus of tonight's presentation, is what do we do when they already get it? So quality planning is a big part of what especially right now, a lot of our current district initiatives are really focused on professional learning communities, so the broader school as a whole, but also professional learning teams, the grade level planning, and what really needs to go into that to make sure that we are differentiating for every student in our class. So that's what it is. We'll talk about those strategies tonight. But what it is not assigning more work to early finishers. So that has a tendency to happen naturally, and sometimes learners appreciate that, and sometimes they're asking for it. And in a lot of situations, that's okay to a certain extent. But it's not in lieu of the other pieces that we're going to be talking about tonight. It's not what should happen in the event that they already get it. It's not the answer to question number 4. It's not assigning students to teach material they already know. Again, something that often happens naturally in a classroom environment. Some kids are super excited that they get it and they want to explain it to their friends. As a classroom teacher, that happened to me all the time, and I'm not going to say, no, you can't tell anyone. In fact, a lot of our classroom discussions revolved around students explaining their thinking to others. But never should a teacher say, okay, when you're finished, I'm assigning you to lead this group over here because they don't understand yet. That's not differentiation. And finally, it is not giving students individual assignments. So we talked about the example of my son's 5th grade class and how there's this huge broad range of needs in that one class. But I'm not expecting Miss Loria to go home every night and plan 25 different lessons to meet the needs of her individual students. That is not practical, and it's not an effective use of her time. But what we do expect is for her to utilize the strategies we're going to talk about tonight to meet all of those needs. There are a lot of differentiation strategies, but the 3 key approaches that we use here in GUSD are depth and complexity, universal themes, and passion projects. So we're going to go, you might have heard of independent study. So new this year is we're trying to rebrand that and talk about them more in the way that they actually are intended to be used, which is passion projects and not independent study. Actually it got a little confusing when we went on Zoom and we had the pandemic and we had an independent study program, completely different, not what this ever was. So we're working on that this year, rebranding that to passion projects, formerly known as independent study. All right, we're ready for our next slide. How many of you read, besides our handout in the back of the room, pretend like you didn't see that today, how many of you have seen these prompts before? Just a show of hands. Okay, maybe a third or so. These look familiar to you. These are the depth and complexity prompts. They were, it was originated from the '94 California Department of Ed framework. It was first described, remember I talked about how originally it was intended for higher level thinkers. It was first described as a thinking curriculum because it increased the level of academic challenge for gifted and high ability students. Now we know it actually really supports the learning needs of all students. So it's a set of 11 prompts that elicit open-ended thinking and reasoning. And if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little more specifically about the 11 prompts. 8 of them are elements of depth, and 3 are complexity. They're called depth and complexity. So to give you a little example of what this might look like in a classroom or on an assignment, let's say students are reading a novel and the teacher is wanting to, the skill that they're addressing is author's purpose. And so they're reading the novel and they come across some imagery or a metaphor. That would be language of the discipline. It's the tool that the author is using to make a point in the story. And the teacher is going to facilitate the students pulling that information out of the text and realizing that the discipline, an author, writing is the discipline, the language that discipline needs to, the language that author needs to be able to speak is in metaphors and using imagery in order to be successful in that career, in that discipline. And so we're training them to find that when they're reading in the literature. But there's many, many examples of this. We can talk about it in science, math, across all disciplines. Let's look at multiple perspectives. So they're reading the same, let's say the same novel, same kids. Yesterday we analyzed language of the discipline. Today we're going to take a look at last chapter and what happened and the different perspectives. So I taught 3rd grade for 10 years, Charlotte's Web, I'm going to use that one. Let's say it's how do the students feel about what happens to Charlotte in the end of the story? And that brings about a very deep and complex conversation, doesn't it? So a teacher who is skilled in differentiation strategies and is utilizing the tools would know how to facilitate that conversation to elicit that level of thinking, that level of complexity within the novel. Some students might not be ready to go that deep or look at that complex with that much complexity. But they hear the ideas of their peers, of their friends, and over time, they're learning from each other. That makes a lot of sense what my buddy just said. So this is why it's not only a useful tool for our highest level thinkers, but it's great for all learners. All right, we're ready for our next slide. Okay, the rollout of depth and complexity. That's one of the handouts that I put on the back table. If you didn't get it, you can pick it up on your way out. I wanted you to have this tonight because I think not only is it a useful tool for teachers, but it's not really that complex that parents who simply recognize the images and know the names of them, and you can go back, once this is posted to our website, you can go back 3 slides and look, and the names are all listed there, plus you can Google depth and complexity, and it's all over the place. If you're familiar with it, you can tie your conversations with things that are happening at home with what's going on at school. And my hope would be that your child would be able to engage with you on that level, that same level of depth and complexity as they are in the classroom. So just a suggestion, if you want to try it out, I want you, if you have a kindergartner, please don't try to talk about trends and cross disciplines with your kindergartner, maybe, but just know that teachers are not unveiling that until 4th grade. So in kinder, we start with our most basic, big idea, details, and patterns, and then we build in 1st grade. And the 1st grade teachers know and trust their kindergarten colleagues. They really do come into 1st grade as big idea, details, and pattern experts. So now we're going to build slowly. We're going to add unanswered questions, and then so on until 4th grade. 4th grade is the first year where all 11 prompts are introduced and utilized, and then they build capacity, I would say, in 5th and 6th, and that may look like merging of the, let's look at, not only will we look at the perspectives of Charlotte's Web, but now let's talk about the ethics of the way that, I'm going to give a different example from Charlotte's Web. The pig. I'm sorry if you haven't read the novel. And in the very beginning, Wilbur was going to be bacon, but there was intervention and ended up, the whole story took place, right? But what's the ethical, there were different perspectives involved in that, why not, right? It's a pig, that's what we do with pigs. She had a different feeling about that, save the pig, so there's ethical questions that can come up in that as well. A much deeper discussion that maybe not all third graders are ready to have, but some are, and we have it. And that's an example of how we might bring together 2 of the prompts. And by 6th grade, really they're just being interwoven all throughout the curriculum, all day. I've given a lot of literary examples, but in math, rules, trends. We talk about across disciplines, meaning when might you need to know how to multiply? It's not just when you're sitting in your classroom, but across disciplines. Patterns in math, a lot of unanswered questions in science and social studies, right? So all of these are prompts to help teachers elicit that deep level and complex level of thinking. And we're ready for our next slide. So I love pictures. I take a lot of pictures. I do visit classrooms. So I'm going to share with you some things that I saw in classrooms as I was walking through. These are depth and complexity thinking frames. So a lot of teachers utilize them just as assignments that they'll hand out. It's a little frame on a paper, and there's many versions of the frame out there. This is actually on a whiteboard, so it's a big frame, and it's a class discussion. It's 2 third grade teachers at the same school studying the same unit in Wonders, or the same lesson in Wonders. And the essential question is, what do we know about Earth and its neighbors? And you can see that they're generally discussing it in the same way, but the 2 different, it was either the teacher's decision to elicit slightly different thoughts and thinking patterns with the two stories, or it could have been, what did you notice in the story? What stood out to you? What depth and complexity icons or prompts came to mind to you, and the students may have shared out. And this was the very first day, so they hadn't had a lot of time to interact with it. I wish I had gone back and taken a picture of what it looks like at the end, but this will be filled up with all kinds of information and input that the students give, and that goes up on the board for everyone to see. All right, and our next slide is more photos. So we also provide teachers with the magnets, love the magnets. Super useful tool because they're all the prompts in there. You can move them all over the room. You can put them everywhere on your whiteboard. You can copy them and put them on things that are not magnetic as well. So this teacher is using the prompts to make sure that the kids understand during that time of day what it is that they're focusing on. Okay, so during writing and grammar, ELD, details and big idea, later on in math, they're going to look at patterns, unanswered questions, and rules. Another use might be with science. We always start out, as most scientists do, our science units with what are we trying to find out? What are we doing? What do we want to know? What are we curious about? What do we want to investigate? So we put up our unanswered questions as scientists. This might be my favorite that I saw because I actually was a part of the end of the unit. So when I was it started out as a persuasive essay in 6th grade, persuasive writing unit, and then she ended up taking it into like a live debate in the classroom. And that's when I was observing, and it was awesome to see these kids and to learn that actually some of them had really had the opposite perspective and they were arguing, but they'd been challenged and asked if they would be willing to argue the other side. So it's bringing in, you can see how different grade levels, like that might not be appropriate for a 1st grader, but by 6th grade, that's an absolutely perfect way to utilize these types of prompts. All right. This is a close-up of an activity that another 6th grade teacher did. So read-alouds in 6th grade. Is there really a place for read-aloud in 6th grade? Yes. So this teacher was reading Fish in a Tree, but not just reading and telling the kids to sit back, relax, and put their heads down on the table. She was asking them, now that they are experts in depth and complexity, to think about the novel, think about what they're reading through the lens of all 11 of the prompts. So on the other side that are the rest of them. And you can see this student is really owning the opportunity right here. And then over here, this is a little activity that a lot of teachers like to start the year with. It's depth and complexity in blank's life. And so they get a little flip book and they get to talk about patterns in their life or trends in their life, unanswered questions. What will I be when I grow up? So that's a fun way to kind of just do a get to know you, a community building activity that integrates depth and complexity at the beginning of the year. All right, next slide. The last example I want to give you is how teachers might create a connection collection. So this is, we're going to see a video of Mrs. Barber's class. She's a 4th grade teacher at Elwood, and this was last year, but you can see she has what she's going to explain as this is not hers, but this is a connection collection. This is from another classroom, and this is a close-up of one of the stickies over on the for overtime on our collection. So this is Mia, and she noticed that at first, in the novel front desk, at first they got $5 a person. Now they don't get much. So that wasn't the teacher saying, read that sentence and then talk about what the change over time was. That was Mia raising her hand, and that's what a collection is. It's as we're learning, as we're going throughout the day, what are you noticing in terms of these prompts? And Mia noticed, she raised her hand and said, I noticed a change over time there. And then the teacher was like, oh great, tell us about it. And then she got to write it on a sticky and put it on the board. And then they collect these connections over time. So we're going to see if we can navigate this. If you hit escape and go, yep, that should be Mrs. Farber's.
So then Ashley could take one and write front desk, because that's what we were talking about, right? A novel. If she was talking about math, she'd write math. If we were talking about a different text, she'd write the text. If we were talking about science, social studies, whatever it is, you're going to label the subject. And then she would write what we learned about Mr. Yell's skywarding accent. Not sure, but are you talking about like a detail from the story that's important, but maybe not as big as the big idea? Okay. Jacob, one last thing.
It's asking, does it have to be something specific to in class, or can it be outside of school?
If you could explain where you found it and how it's connected to your learning in some way, I'm fine with that.
All right, so we'll go back to the slideshow. All right, perfect. So that was Mrs. Farber. You'll notice on this slide, this is depth and complexity. There's another collection over here, and we're going to talk about universal themes in just a moment. Perfect segue. We'll go to our next slide, universal themes. So we'll see in a minute, we can also do collections for connections with a universal theme. What is a universal theme? It's from the slide earlier, it's our second of our 3 big key strategies that we use for differentiation in our district. A universal theme is an idea that applies to anyone, regardless of cultural differences or geographic location. Universal themes are ways to connect ideas across all disciplines. A theme is a central idea about the human condition. It is a generalization about life or human nature. And here are the different themes within each grade level. So kinder is order, first grade patterns, second grade cause and effect, third grade relationships, fourth grade systems, that's what we're going to see in a moment, fifth grade change, and sixth grade power. So you can see also, similarly to depth and complexity, there's quite a bit of thought put into when to introduce each of the prompts. If you think about order from a kindergartner's perspective, there's a lot of opportunities to think about that. There are deeper ones that could also be considered at a sixth grade level as well that a kindergartner probably wouldn't think of. But if you think about power, it's a little more limiting from a young person's perspective. They might not be able to think as abstractly to think about something like power of higher governmental, different government levels of government, or social schemas, different, the power of language. They might not necessarily be able to think that abstractly. So we save that one for sixth grade. So there's a thought process in how we rolled these out as well. All right. So let's see, do we have time for these two? We do. We're gonna go ahead and try it. So this first slide here, it's actually a series of 5 parts with short little clips. This is from Ian Bird's website, Birdseed TV. He is another expert in the field, used to be a teacher for many, many years, and now he's moved on to creating lessons for differentiating for higher level thinking, and he's awesome. And I've had the pleasure of listening to him speak at California Association for the Gifted conferences, and now I am a subscriber to his work, and we have we have a group of 17 district specialists who are working with some of our higher level learners. So some of your kids might be working with these specialists. They have subscriptions, and we've done trainings with them on how to utilize these lessons with them. So we're what I want you to think about as you're watching this series of lessons is think about why we might want to teach kids to think in this way across disciplines within a specific theme. So we'll watch this first video.
Let's introduce the universal theme of systems. We call this a universal theme because it can apply to anything. It's not an idea that only works with math or only with writing or only with baseball. We can see systems everywhere. Now, a system is something that has different parts that work together. It makes me think of the human body, or a basketball team, or an engine. Each of these are systems with different pieces that work together. So the first thing you're going to do is to keep brainstorming examples of systems. And don't stop with just 10 or 15, keep going and going. This works best when you do it with a whole bunch of people, so you can hear ideas that you might not have thought of. Once you have a few dozen examples of systems, come on back for the next video.
So if we had more time, I'd have us do this, and we would shout out, and we'd start writing things on the board or typing them in and mirroring it up here. But a teacher could actually use this exact video at the beginning of the year to introduce their universal theme. We also have created a district committee, our GES Teacher Advisory Committee created them additional resources for teachers to roll out their themes as well. So then, if we go up to part 2, we'll look at the next step in this lesson.
Making categories for your examples. And you can do this by yourself or with 1 or 2 other students. I like to start by just making some pairs.
Typically,
2 examples that go together for some reason. And again, there's no need to explain your thinking just yet. I like to use symbols or colors to start with. I'm going to partner up a class and a family. I'll make another pair using the ocean and ecosystems. And then at this point, I might want to create another pair or add to an existing pair. I'll add basketball team to class and family. And then I'll make a new pair using clock and television. In the end, we want somewhere between 3 and 5 categories for all of your examples. Once you have your examples grouped up, come on back for the next video.
All right, so they work in teams of 2, 3, they get their ideas, and then we move on to the next video.
Now that we have all of our examples grouped into categories, we're going to use a new graphic organizer so that it's easier to see those categories. Since I ended up with 3 categories, blue triangle, yellow diamond, and purple star, I'm going to make 3 columns, and you might have 4 or 5 columns.
And teachers
So
typically
I put
can just
all
show
of my
kids how to
group
create their
examples
own
into those
graphic
columns.
organizers.
And then we're going to give each of these categories a label, just a few words. And this is your chance to explain why you group the examples in these ways. We're going to put that label below the examples. I'll explain more about that in the next video. So my first category will be called systems of people. Class, a family, a basketball team, these are all systems that are made out of people. And the next one would be human-made systems. Railroads, clocks, DVD players, these are all systems and they're made by humans. And I would call that last category natural systems. So now you're going to transfer your examples over to the new organizer, and then you're going to give each category a name, 1 to 3 words. And then what's this section for? Well, I'll tell you in the next video.
Okay, before we play the next video for our auditory learners, does anybody remember what he said? What is the purpose of this part of the process? It's an opportunity for them to do something. Anybody remember? You can shout it out if you remember. It's to explain. So they're being asked without having, without writing it out with a sentence, they're being asked to use a graphic organizer to represent their thinking and explaining why, and then explain to their team or their group why they think that way, which is a huge part of differentiation, right? Is giving students an opportunity to explain their thinking to each other and to listen to listen and consider other people's perspectives. But I don't know about you, but I at first was like, I'm not really sure how some of these things are coming together, and it took a few, okay, and then by categorizing, it helped me understand his thought process. And then, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would take that. So, all right, let's take a look at the next one.
So I ended up with 3 categories: systems of people, human-made systems and natural systems. And I'm sure you all came up with totally different categories for systems, which is what makes this such an interesting exercise. And now we're going to make a statement about systems using our labels. Just a sentence about our universal theme. Now, yes, you could just list the categories. Can be made of people, be human-made, or found in nature. But a list of categories is blah. So see if you can come up with something a little more interesting. And it's okay if you don't use all of the labels or if you change the wording a little bit. How about this one? Systems from nature can destroy human-made systems and vice versa, or the other way around. Or natural and human-made systems can form other systems. For example, the skeleton is a system that makes up the human body, and human bodies can make other systems like basketball teams. Now, we're putting this big statement at the bottom because if you notice, this graphic organizer goes from most specific in the top row to medium-sized ideas, these names of categories, to one big idea, our statement about a universal theme. Okay, so once you've written a statement about systems using some of your labels, come on back for the final video.
So a couple things to note here. I love the progression, right? You can see how it's very clearly rolled out to the point where the other thing I love about this is he gives a non-example, which is what many kids will start with. It's the easy, oh, well, this is just 3 sets of systems. But he shows them that there's a way to dig deeper, and then he gives a couple of examples. And it's always amazing to me to see what kids come up with. It's like I learned so much from them, right? And they learn so much from each other. So many different ways to look at this activity. And then finally, for my favorite part, the grand finale.
Whenever we come up with a big idea statement, I like to see what new ideas we can connect it to. So we're going to rebuild that graphic organizer like this. We're going to put your statement up top this time. And now we're going to try to build support for it underneath with examples from different areas. Now again, you could make 3 or 4 or 5 columns, and each column is going to represent a different area. And that could mean different school subjects like math, language arts, science. It could be different areas of your life like school, family, and sports, or even specific books, or specific units within one subject. Whatever you and your teacher decide on, we're going to look for examples that support the big idea. I'm going to use 3 school subjects, math, language arts, and science. And in math, a multiplication expression like this is a human-made system that can form a larger system of numbers and symbols. In language arts, a sentence is a human-made system that can be part of a larger system, like a paragraph. And in science, a pig is a natural system, but it's also part of a larger system, like a food web, and then maybe an ecosystem. And I could keep going in each of these areas. Now, I always like it when students come up with interesting ideas, not just 100% perfect ideas. So feel free to stretch your thinking here and take a risk. So you're going to think of 3 or 4 or 5 areas.
We can move on.
And then come up with examples in each of those areas that support the big idea you create.
That's what the teacher's work is, right? And Ian Bird says it in the video, but the teacher then facilitates that deeper level. Let's whatever interesting things can you come up with. So it might start off surface, although some of those were already beyond what I might have come up with myself, but the students will start somewhere and the teacher will continue to encourage them to go deeper, make them more complex, get interesting with it. Let's see. I want to save some time for questions, so we're going to skip this video. It's Miss Barber again, and she was kind enough to let me come back and record her unveiling or rolling out her collection for system, the fourth grade universal theme. So it's a very similar idea. A concept comes up, they notice a system. The big takeaway from this one, I'll summarize in 20 seconds or less, is you'll see this is the beginning of the year and the students are talking about systems like ecosystems. We hear Zoe. parent in the audience, daughter, say solar systems. So they're thinking in terms of self-school world, but eventually we talk about how those systems work together, or how systems can be inside other systems. And if you go back and look at the difference between the beginning of the year and their ideas on the collections, and then what kids are coming up with at the end of the year, there is quite a level of growth, quite a difference in the level of complexity in their observations. All right, let's move to some bulletin boards. So here are some other pictures of 6th grade collection, power with money, power of words. Here's a 3rd grade universal theme bulletin board collection for relationships. This one's organized by subjects. I think Mrs. Farber's was as well. Okay, let's take a look at the next. There's other ways also to organize bulletin boards, and every classroom does have a universal theme bulletin board. Some are more interactive, like the collections that you saw, and others might be more to demonstrate student learning within the universal theme. So for example here, the teacher's chosen a couple of, here's a key word in math, looks like probably a couple of math, maybe exemplary assignments to show how change is happening in math, also in science up here, so some student work examples. There's other ways to think about outside of our subject. We can think about cause and effect, the 2nd grade universal theme. We can think of that in terms of ourselves, school, and the world. So they're categorizing their thoughts that way. And then systems, also these are our big ideas within systems. So this teacher has chosen to put the big ideas up there, and then as students think of, oh, we just talked about how systems interact, I'm going to note that and put it right here. Oh, we just talked about how systems are made of parts that work together. Let's put that specific example up here. You can see how systems can be open or closed is a little harder, but over time they'll get there. Or the teacher might notice that and say, I see that we're having a harder time understanding what that means, so I'm going to be really paying attention in the next week and look for examples of that, and I'm going to try to draw it out of them. And as soon as one sticky goes up, I've noticed that sort of opens the floodgates, and oh, okay, and then the stickies, walls become covered in an ideal world. All right, next slide. Our 3rd of the 3 key differentiation strategies that we utilize here at GUSD are passion projects, formerly known as independent study. So I'm just going to read here so you kind of understand. I want to make sure we save enough time for questions, but what are passion projects and why do we have them? So passion projects are designed to accommodate varied interests and abilities of individual students in the classroom. Remember, we talked about there are a lot of individual abilities. The steps of passion projects follow the process of academic research and include identifying an area of interest, writing a research question, gathering resources, researching, summarizing, and sharing findings. Students with unique and/or high ability tend to identify strong areas of interest at a very young age. That was one of the characteristics on that sheet that you picked up. Maybe some of you noticed that in your child. Highly curious, they often display a need for understanding topics that, while maybe academic, may not be covered in school. So black holes is a big one. While we may allude to things that are related to the science and math involved in black holes on a certain level, we certainly don't go into depth in black holes, but some of our students are really excited about them and do want to go into depth. Let's see. Passion Project offers students the opportunity to research interests of their own and further practice reading, informative writing, and oral presentation skills. Which brings me to the next slide. I had to doctor this up a little bit because we did transition from independent study projects to passion projects. And this is a certificate from our Independent Study Showcase, which we haven't been able to have in 2 years because of the pandemic, but it's coming back this year. So it'll be rebranded as Passion Projects, and students who have gone through the process with their teachers in their classes, with their classmates. Another reason why independent study was a little bit of a misnomer was that they aren't necessarily independent. We often ask students who have like interests to team together and collaborate on the project. So it could be 2 kids together or more. Typically 2 is about it. But Passion Project Showcase coming in May, so look out for that. And ask your child if they have been 4th through 6th grade. I want to mention that 4th through 6th grade teachers who have gifted identified students in their classes will be taking those students, or perhaps the entire class, through the independent study process by the end of the year. Not to say, though, that primary teachers won't offer that as well. It may be, though, that it's offered to individuals only who seem to have a unique ability or a unique interest and are capable of some more independent work, because this is done usually at a time during the school day when other students are doing other things. So they're given time within the school day. It's not in addition to, it's instead of, to pursue this interest, because they've proven that they can do whatever it is that other students might be working on, and that this is going to meet their needs more directly. So where was I going with that? Oh yes, so 4th through 6th grade, if you have a 4th through 6th grader who, per the COGAT, in 3rd grade, and last year 3rd and 4th grade, was identified as gifted, they will be introduced to this at some point throughout the year. It is not for every learner. There are highly capable learners who try this process and find that it doesn't match their learning style, and that's perfectly okay. But we will expose them to it. We will offer the opportunity. Many teachers, primary included, may offer this to small groups or their whole class, and then take from there the ones who are interested and more eager and excited about continuing with another passion, or their own unique passion if it was something that they chose to do as a whole class, and they'll continue with them. So I was a 3rd grade teacher. It wasn't required. I didn't have any gifted identified students yet. I mean, I had them, but I didn't know yet. I still decided I wanted to do this. I unveiled it with my whole class. We did it as a kind of the steps and how it looks and what that looks like. And then I saw who was successful, who was excited about doing it, another one, and then it was more in a small group. Sort of if we would do rotations, that would be I would group them that way, and if they were doing a passion project, they would come back with me at that time, or I would pull them back while the class was working on something else. So a lot of different ways to approach passion projects, a lot of different reasons for utilizing this tool. It is just one tool, but it's a powerful one, especially for those students that race through the content without real need for review. I don't think we're going to have time for that video either, so let's go ahead, and there's a video here. It's actually my 3rd graders taking them through the introduction to the independent study process. But we'll move on. It will be, hopefully, the slideshow will be posted, so you will be able to go back and click on those if you're curious to see what that looks like. So this is not a differentiation strategy, but I didn't want to end tonight without mentioning we do have gifted education support advisory committees. We have a teacher committee and a parent committee. And our mission, get ready, it's got a lot of words, it's a long sentence, is to support social and emotional development and provide challenging learning opportunities responsive to the needs of high ability students using research-based, differentiated instructional practices applied but not limited to grade level standards. So with that mission, if we go to our next slide, we have two groups, the Teacher Advisory Committee and our Parent Advisory Committees, who support this bigger idea of gifted instruction and what that means in our district. Our teachers, so you see there's still a couple of holes. We actually just filled the Isla Vista teacher rep hole. Still looking for a parent at Isla Vista, in case there's anyone out there that is at IB and wants to join our committee. And I tell a teacher that I actually think we got as well today. So these are our committee reps. The teacher reps, we meet throughout the year, and this year we had to meet one meeting already, and in that meeting the reps decided we were going to prioritize two focus groups, two needs that we have in terms of meeting the needs of our high level learners. And those two are rebranding independent study as passion projects. So revisiting what that framework looks like and how we're going to support our district's teachers in that kind of transition over. And then also revamping our showcase, right? It's been 2 years since we've done it. I'm new in this position. I was new last year, so I've never done, other than being attending, I've never actually seen, I've never facilitated one. So I've seen one, but we're opening it up to new ideas and trying to see what we can do with that. And then math extensions. We feel like there are a lot of ways, there's a lot more ways and a lot more support and resources out there for differentiating and extending in all other subject areas except for math. And math is tricky because when you are at the 5th and 6th grade level and you are beyond elementary math, it's hard for an elementary teacher who may not have studied calculus in college to support students. And again, we don't necessarily individualize instruction, we extend. So we go deeper with the grade level standards, not accelerate. We don't go beyond in most cases. So that's a need that we've identified in our district, and that's what that subcommittee or that focus group will be working on. And then our parent reps, we have had one meeting, but in general, our parent reps are sort of the eyes, the ears, the minds at each of the sites, and their job is to communicate with the general parent public on their campuses, and if there are concerns, ideas, needs, to communicate those back at our meetings or through an email to me, to the principal. They will encourage their peers or colleagues, their co-parents, parents that they know, their friends, to reach out to their teachers, to reach out to other parents for suggestions. It's a community, and we all know it takes a village. So that's one role. The other role is that they help me set the direction for the content of these nights. So if we go to our next slide, maybe it's the next one. Oh, it's not. It's in a different presentation. I'm also doing individual presentations for similar topics at each site this week and next week. So I wanted to say there are 4, I meant to say that actually in the beginning, there are 4 parent information nights every year, and this is the first. The topics will vary based on need from year to year, although this one is pretty standard because we do like to start the year with the basics. Last year we did social emotional learning, which I think we're probably going to end up carrying over this year. It's a big need. We talked about math differentiation last year, and transitioning to junior high. So that one was specific to 6th grade, maybe even 5th grade parents who were curious about what sort of opportunities there are for higher level thinkers, gifted, identified students in the junior highs. So this will be posted on our website. These are some resources for parents that I like to point out. We did look at one video from Birdseed TV, but he has, it's not just Birdseed TV, he has this website. You can sign up to get free newsletters, and he does have information for parents. It's not just for teachers. So I encourage you to check these out when you have some more time and if you're curious. But I did want to make a special point to note this line right here. It So in-person resources, the most valuable resource for you is your teacher, your child's teacher, and the principal. But I encourage you to have an open dialogue all year long with your child's teacher. You don't need to wait until a conference time to bring up concerns, to ask questions. They're simply an email away. You can ask to set up a time if you think it's a lengthier conversation, or you can simply shoot them a simple question in an email, or ask them if there's a time that you could talk about that. Please, please, please don't wait until you're feeling frustrated if there's something that you feel is not quite right, because oftentimes it's a misunderstanding, or there are things happening that may not be very transparent or as transparent as they need to be, and it's just a matter of communicating and asking those questions and getting those answers. Your GES parent rep, your teacher rep, or me. And we'll go to our final slide, questions. We have, 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
You were right at 7:30 right now.
Oh, goodness.
What's the frequency of everything being integrated? You kind of alluded to those 3 different main topics, but that's not what they're doing every day. So that happens how often? Like once a month?
It is every day.
It is every single day that they
So,
come.
for example, those magnets that you saw,
Right.
If they're focusing on big idea and details, that's a discussion that they'll have during this portion of the day. It also comes up very organically, so it doesn't necessarily have to be on the schedule, but we're having a conversation and a child will just shout out, "Oh my gosh, that's a really ethical situation." It even happens like off the playground, like we're getting into an ethical situation right now. And so I used to run over and like, "You're right," and I'd point to the prompt and just to like make that connection there. So how is that ethical? And then they would just elicit the discussion to continue to go deeper with it. And then same with those universal themes, those collections, of how the connections happen across disciplines, across time, throughout the day, throughout the lesson, throughout the year, all year long. And then independent study is a little bit different. Once for some kids, and some might go through several in a year. I've never seen more than 3, but I haven't gone beyond 3rd grade. I taught K through 3 for 17 years, so in 3rd grade, I did it with a couple of 2nd graders. In 3rd grade, I always did, and I had one year a child do 3 after I waited until spring to introduce it, and many teachers do. And then I had a child who was just into it, and he did 3 projects. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and if we're interested in the passion project, do we reach out to the teacher or wait for them to prompt
Absolutely.
it? Okay.
Yep. And they might say, what? Independent studies / passion projects
Right,
as
okay.
we're transitioning.
Jill, I just want to add, just because I get the joy of walking through the school sites regularly, so I was on 2 sites today. Depth and complexity is definitely integrated and happening everywhere. So what I'll often see is like one of the magnets gets pulled down for a lesson and you see the work around it. Or like today, because I was walking some board members around, so I was pointing out these things so they know what they were looking at. But like instead of a traditional worksheet, you'll see the 3 icons, and then the kids they've already been taught these pieces, but then they're working off of those pieces. So it's not a fill in the blank and a shallow thought process, but instead they're making these connections. So I would say the depth and complexity, your kids should know well, and if you ask them about them, they should probably be able to tell you about them pretty well. Like she said, there's a progression, and if they don't, then that's a good question for them to, and you to have the conversation with the teacher. And then the themes, you can look as report cards come up. There's every class has a bulletin board. You'll see what the theme is as they work through it. It may not be a daily thing, but it's pretty regular that they connect, and you'll see that up there. And then, we're hoping the passion projects take off again as we have a chance to have that showcase and revisit and rebrand it.
It was hard
Yeah.
because we had the 2 years, of kind of in and out of school. Spring is when they're typically unveiled or unrolled or and then the spring showcase, and so that was the end of that, and then it didn't happen the next year, and then last year, was it 3 years, I think? that
It
we had
was,
to-
and I just wanna add one other thing, working with gifted kids, is sometimes children who are gifted perseverate on their topic and don't get off the ground with all the pieces of the passion project. So one of the things that we do permit in the showcase is to present whatever you've got so far. Because they might have gone super deep in parts of it, and that was really wonderful and appropriate, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't present that just because they didn't do all the pieces. Because again, that's part of the beauty of it,
It's
is
a
that they're
process,
choosing what they're learning and they're navigating this. So as you're helping your children navigate this, part of your role as a parent, and I know this will come as part of our other presentations, is we're helping them not be so hard on themselves. That's one of the huge things our teachers do, is not only do they all do all this so your kids have these opportunities, but we spend a lot of time helping them be okay with imperfection and with because they're their worst enemies. They're just, they have their plans, and if it doesn't go according to their plan, it can cause some deep feelings, because you're laughing because I know you've experienced, I've experienced, I have 2 adult children that this is a process, and it's just one of the things we know about children who have high abilities and gifted learners is they not only are academically capable, but they feel emotions on a different plane. And my favorite, I'll share with you a personal story. My 21-year-old was in his senior in college. When he was about 4, we were reading a book on sharks. We probably had read, about 80 books on sharks at that point. And he started crying. And we were talking, there was a shark with a little pop-out book, and it was saying like their average age was like 75 years or whatnot. And he starts crying. I'm like, why are you crying? Grandpa's gonna die someday. Like, he had made this connection to mortality. And that's what we started talking about, because the shark was gonna die at 75 years. Like, these are the kinds of things, I'm sure you've had similar experiences, but that's what our teachers are really good at. They know your kids well. So I would also invite you don't have to wait for the parent, the presentation on any sort of social emotional, but I'd invite you, if you're seeing any types of experiences with your child where they're feeling frustrated with school or relationships with others or making choices or whatever that looks like, conferences are coming up, please have those conversations with your teacher. It's normal. It's normal for your children because that's their normal. And you get the fun of helping them navigate, and they will get through it, and they grow up, and they're gonna be amazing, but it can be painful as a parent to help them navigate. So anyways, that's my little spiel of the greatness of
There are
the
a lot of
partnership.
questions, and I will stay as long as we need to answer them. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so if you don't have a question and you need to leave, feel free to stand up and head out, and I appreciate you being here. But I'll stay and do hands.
I know you said that they're working, like if the teacher can't, doesn't exactly know the math that's maybe higher level that your kid is doing, but so, like for example, if she does a star math and it's now at a level because it progresses with her, that she hasn't learned it, so now she's just kind of like trying to put it together, but no one's teaching. How do you figure that one out?
I'll tell you what I do, because I was a 3rd grade teacher, and now I have a son in 5th grade math who's doing a higher level, and I'm trying to help him even with the math club activities. Khan Academy, I often have to look up, has anyone here heard of Khan Academy? It's actually, same spelling as theirs.
different spelling,
Different,
but
is
same
it
name. Khan Academy is K-H-A-N.
H-A-N, yes it is, you're right. So K-H-A-N, Khan Academy has a lot of great videos and tutorials. YouTube, you'd be surprised, but I often
Jill,
will.
do you want to share a little bit about Math Club in case they
sure.
don't know?
Yeah. So Math Club, is there anyone here who has not heard of Math Club? Not heard of Math Club. Okay. It is a district-supported but site-led by volunteers with some site support as well this year, Math Club. And it does lead into, or it can lead into Math Super Bowl. It doesn't have to. Your child might not like to compete, but may like math. So the only prerequisite to joining, and it is from 7:30 to 8:15 in the morning, so it's voluntary, before school, fourth on Tuesdays, fifth on Wednesdays, sixth on Thursdays. And we do really analytical, we do very high level math, but we also do builds. Today we built bridges with toothpicks and tape. We have a math club lead in the room. Super fun today, wasn't it?
Totally cool.
Last week was really hard. We had some kids in tears, but with part of it, right? We're teaching academic struggle. It is okay to not get it on the first try. We will get there. And it's just repeatedly exposing them to those challenging experiences. We have math games, there's logic puzzles, but if you want more information on Math Club, just email me and I'll get you hooked up.
What are the grades?
It's open to 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. Yes, and the gentleman in the back, and then we'll do.
What's the recommended pathway for communication if you feel like you don't feel like there is support in class?
Okay, good
First,
question.
Can I give an example? That I brought the idea that we're coming to these GES meetings, and my son's teacher says, I don't know what GES is.
Oh, funny. Okay. Well, we do have a lot of teachers who are new to Goleta, but I would be, is this a new to Goleta? Maybe we need to check.
Yes.
Did you say gifted education support? And then, and you explained it, and hopefully there was some clarity around it at that point. All of our teachers have been trained in differentiation. There, with the exception of a handful who were hired at the very last minute this year, and we're waiting. What we've learned is as a first-year teacher, this is a lot. So we did the training last year, and we had to do a lot of it asynchronously because there aren't enough substitutes to release, and there's not enough time to teach all of this in several after-school meetings. So we did some after school, some asynchronously, and what we determined is it wasn't the same level of depth and complexity that the rest of us, like myself, I was trained where I had 6 full release days. Sub went into my classroom, and the person who was in my job before me trained me on all these differentiation strategies. For 6 days, we had time to create lessons, pair with colleagues, team, do research. So if there's a teacher that's unfamiliar, when you say the acronym, at first, there's a lot. I have a list of 40,000 education acronyms. It's just a joke, but perhaps.
I guess the question is more like, is it like a chain of command of like, should we be reaching out, like CCing
If you've asked specific questions and you still feel like you're not getting an adequate response, the next step would be the principal and looping the principal in. We don't ever like to go straight there because perhaps there is something happening, it's just a lack of communication or miscommunication. And then the principal's job would be to bring in the teacher, ask the teacher some questions, and then maybe we have the conversation. Maybe they bring me in, and then I would work to support the teacher. So that has happened. That's a great question. Yes. Oh no, it was here, and then we'll go over here. Sorry.
Just one quick one and then a second one. Did I hear you say that students are classified in 3rd grade, or is this for like a 1st grader? It's not something that's happening right now.
Correct.
Okay.
So in our district currently, we universally screen with a test called the COGAT in 3rd grade in January, February, and then they're identified, and so that's why a lot of our services, or not really services, but our discussion is around 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. Not that we're aware that there are gifted students who are very, very young, right, in kindergarten all the way through, but we don't identify them until 3rd grade.
And then did you say there were 17 specialists?
Yes.
What do
So
they do?
this year we have there's a tier 2 time. So what site is yours?
El Camino.
El Camino calls it learning teams.
Learning teams.
Some call it win time, what I need. Some call it target time. what it is after tier 1 instruction, which is the core essential skills, everybody's hearing it, everybody's learning, and it's that, what do we want our students to know, how are we gonna know if they know it, and then what do we do if they don't know, what do we do if they do know? So if they don't know, they're grouped into small groups to reteach and support until they do. If they do know and they're ready to go beyond, we're supporting that by adding, depending on the size of the site and the needs, 1 to 2.5 specialists to, what's a better word than dilute, to make this group sizes smaller so that we can more closely target individual needs during that 30 minutes a day of instruction. So that happens 30 minutes a day, first through 6th, sometimes kindergarten at some sites.
And so just added to that, it is a work in progress because it is out of the pandemic, we had this opportunity to build this back. And so Jill is supporting our specialists who are working with kids that are ready for more. So they all have a subscription to the Birdseed TV. We're working on literature circles, discussion projects, deeper, but they aren't, they aren't fixed groupings. So it could be every 2 weeks, it could be a month. The teacher team will have a standard that they are working on addressing. They'll have assessed it in their classroom. They meet together and they say, okay, Mary, not getting it so much, so we're gonna keep her and we're gonna help, and Jill, she's got it, so she's gonna go here and she's gonna extend and do something more. And so it's just another layer so that kids are able to, keep going and they're not waiting. So we're really enjoying it,
Yeah.
but it is a work in progress. We're kind of taking all these ideas and trying to add more opportunities in the day for it to happen.
It's an opportunity to do project-based learning where they are given, with students with similar needs and readiness levels to explore deeper, whatever essential skill is the target skill.
It's very
What was
fluid.
that called again? Sorry.
Well,
It's your site, it's called Learning Teams, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it's tier 2 instruction in terms of the umbrella term. All right, I think then we were gonna go over.
When we first came back to school, all the kids were grouped in little pods to keep social distancing.
Oh,
I
right.
guess. But what I found, it worked really well for this reason. It let the teachers group them by the rate they finished, and they could talk to them individually as 5, 4, 5, 6 at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed this year a lot, like half the classes, they put all the chairs back facing the same way, and they went back to regular desks. And I don't know if that's grade specific.
I'm not
I got
sure I
a second, third,
understand.
and 6th grader, so I don't know.
So the seating arrangements?
Yeah.
Yeah, what site are you at?
At Brandon.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. So those are just personal preferences
Yeah.
from the teacher and sometimes responding to the needs of the children.
Yeah.
And having taught 6th grade a number of years, 6th graders have a lot to say.
Yeah.
So it could just be momentarily, they needed to be able
Well,
to have a little bit of
I
separation.
thought it
but-
was great because it allowed the kids to work at their own speed. And
Yeah.
For the same things you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the follow-up to that is, I understand, like, most of this is all great stuff, but I didn't get the differentiation part of it. This is still the same thing you're giving to everybody facing the same way until you get to the passion projects. So, like, what kind of
Okay.
tools are you giving the teachers to do this? It's the same
With-
thing with the math, when a kid's bored and they're sitting there. They gotta
With
sit
the
there for an
tools,
hour,
right,
but-
so with depth and complexity, it's provides students with an opportunity to go deeper and broader. But not all students are accessing those opportunities at the same level.
So is it like they've read a paper on this, or how are they doing that? Like, how is the teacher doing this in the day?
Let me think of an example. Let's go back to Charlotte's Web.
Yeah.
And the teacher poses the question using the tools of depth and complexity.
I can give an example
Okay.
because I saw sixth grade today at Branton.
Oh,
And they were, all three classes were working on the novel Egypt game. And it was actually there that I saw one of the icons pulled down. They were using the details. But and they were working in groups after they did their individual work. So what you're gonna see is, maybe Jill is gonna get some, in her initial think time, she's gonna maybe get more down than I would, even though the prompt is the same. She's gonna have her ideas, then I'm gonna have mine, then we'll have our talk time together. They actually were having collaboration time. Then I get a chance to revise mine, she gets to add on to hers. Then the product, like you saw in the Birdseed TV, because it starts with one layer and then the teacher will help them prompt so they get to the next level and next level. So what Jill might do in her product will be more complex than maybe what I'm ready to do. I might need some more sentence frames or a vocabulary bank to get to where, maybe I need to be. She might use a second resource in addition to the Egypt game. Maybe as Marion's gonna say, okay, well, remember when we talked about this in social studies, and then you'll have the kid taking 2 or 3 resources and synthesizing together. But it looks the same to the children, and it can look the same to the parents, which is why we do this, so you know what to ask your kids about. So the best thing I advise for parents to do is to ask your kids about what it is they were doing and what do you think that you were learning about, what connections you were making.
Yeah, I get nothing.
Yeah, so you get nothing. Okay, that is fair, having 2 boys. I have learned
Yeah.
we play a lot of rummy cube because then I get a little bit more, or if I do walking, I get a little more, so that's true. 6th graders start, that's all good.
But the key I got out of that was though they were breaking up into little groups.
They were,
And that's
they
kind
were.
of what I was alluding to at the beginning that seems to work that I've seen.
and
And I'm also asking because I do the math club there. And
Okay.
I,
Oh, nice.
And
And
there's
they're
15
working
kids
in
there.
groups.
It's kind of nuts. I thought there'd be like 5 little kids and quiet.
Well,
So,
so math club is volunteer, the kids choose to do it,
Yeah.
and it's great that we have.
no,
Are you
no,
doing
it's-
6th
it's an
grade?
extra social
You have
job.
15 in 6th grade? That's a pretty impressive
Yeah,
turnout.
it is.
Usually
6th
by
grade
6th
is
grade, we have
usually-
people fall
Yeah.
off.
I wanted to add to what, as Mary was talking, I was realizing the piece of differentiation that's probably hardest and least visible to parents and students is there are different ways you can differentiate an assignment by the thinking skill, and those are some of the pieces that we just talked about, the depth and complexity. The resource, so if the child might be given different resources, Mary mentioned sentence frames and maybe it's an audio book for one, whereas it's the World Wide Web for another. So the resources involved in the assignment might be differentiated, and then the product. So what are they being asked to do? A student might simply be asked to define the vocabulary word, and then another student might be asked to use the vocabulary words to defend a specific position, or use the vocabularies to write a creative story. So the product might be differentiated, but it would be hard for a parent to say, what'd you do in class? And if you were lucky enough to get a response, you wouldn't know that was different than what they asked Mary to do. Does that help a little bit?
A lot, thank you.
Okay, sure.
I'm an engineer, so I'm not
Well,
good at
Mary's an
I'm not good at abstract things.
I have 2 boys,
Yeah.
so, all right.
You said students are identified in 3rd grade. Identified as gifted, or
Yes,
Okay.
so
and is it just gifted or non-gifted? It's just binary.
this is a big discussion.
So,
And then what's the difference between if they're gifted or not gifted? Like what difference?
Let's start there.
Okay.
So, yes, we have to have a cutoff, and it's 97th percentile and higher in 2 or more of the 3. That's in another presentation, but if they are identified at 97 percentile or higher as gifted, then they're labeled as gifted. If they're not, not a whole lot changes because we're using these strategies with all of our students. We don't have a pull-out program. We're not missing the ones that scored at 96%, or perhaps our high achievers maybe don't have maybe their aptitude isn't at 97, but they're high achievers. They're getting 4s on their report cards. They're the first ones to raise their hands. They're great scholars and students, but maybe not test takers. So by providing differentiation to all of our students, and teachers know their students, and they're grouping them, they may be grouping them accordingly to support those needs, it doesn't matter necessarily what the score is, if that makes, what the identification is.
I will just add for identification. So in the world of education, we're moving away from a single measure tells you and impacts any one thing, right? So we still do have the identification process, but it's one measure of many measures of how to support your child. You as a parent can choose to opt out of the assessment if you don't want to, but we do a universal screening just to make sure parents don't have to opt in. One thing that I do think it's important, where I really find it useful, is hopefully this isn't any of your children, but it is not unusual for a child who's gifted to be very efficient with their life. And they might not choose to do all the opportunities offered to them. And sometimes that leads to a less productive outcome in their schooling. And as a parent who knows your child's gifted, and as teachers who knows your child is gifted, we can really then help advocate to make sure we're getting the right supports in place so that your child, who we know is really capable but is choosing not to participate in the same way, to still have them have a lot of success. And that's where I find that identification super helpful. As we go in, when you leave 6th grade from us, you'll go into Santa Barbara School District. It's a different school district. They are also moving away from coursework that's specifically for gifted. But again, that's where you're really gonna see some of our gifted kids be very efficient. And so, if that's your child, which hopefully it isn't, you have your child has rights then for you to go advocate and say, look, they deserve this opportunity. How are you going to help me and my child meet their needs? Because they do have this ability. And it says it right here because it stays with them. So that's where I find it the most helpful. The other thing we do is we're fortunate in our Goleta Valley that we do actually have quite a number of gifted kids in every school site and in every class. But we do, teachers as they're making placements, we look for making balanced classes, but we also look to try to make sure there's an academic cohort, whether so that kids are, at least, and we look to make sure that there's a handful together so they can have these kinds of academic discussions. Sometimes they annoy each other, so teachers also have to make placements based on social relationships and successful, interactions. So, but that being said, they're very mindful of setting your children up for success. So those are just a couple pieces that I've seen over the years.
Just giving the orientation.
Sorry.
There you go. Other meetings that I'm doing that I referred to earlier are the gifted education support orientations for newly identified gifted families.
There you go.
So there's one tomorrow morning at IB. I did one, actually Joanna Lauer ended up doing most of the presentation, but it's the same idea, and we go into depth more on that side of it. So, and there will be other opportunities to learn about the COGAT and whatnot.
I'm just curious, you started to say there's 2 of 3 areas, but you didn't say what those 3 areas were that you have to get rated in? What are the 3 areas?
On the COGAT there's 3 composite scores that we look at. There's 6 subtests, but they're verbal. 3 of the subtests are verbal, 3 are nonverbal, and 3 are nonverbal. I usually do that one last. And then quantitative. So verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where this other slideshow would be super helpful right now. There's like paper folding, so there's no words.
Spatial
It
skills.
shows, spatial recognition.
There's a hole punched in
Yeah,
and it gets
fold the
turned
paper,
and twisted. Where's
and
the
then-
hole gonna be?
You open it back up, which one of these shows where the hole is? Sure. Yes.
Yeah, two questions. The first is it only the COGAT test that you use or recognize if a student's transferred into your district?
No, if students are transferred in from another district and already have an identification, they maintain that identification.
Okay.